Kia ora, ko Gareth Winter ahau, ko taratahi te maunga uru ngai taku ngakau, ko roa mahanga te awa a mahia nei aku ma harahara, no wararapa ahau, e mihi ana ki ngā tohu au nehe, o wararapa e noho ne au. No reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks for the chance to talk to you today about the role that regional and district archives play in the wider record-keeping community. To do that, I'm going to tell you the story of the Wairarapa Archive, and it's going to be a little bit confusing because I retired 6 months ago, but I'll keep referring to the archive as if I was still working there, because I am still working there, I just don't get paid for working there. That's an aerial view of Masterton that you can see, and Masterton prides itself on its unique history. With its twin sister Greytown, it was formed as a small farm settlement in 1854, the two being the oldest planned towns in North Island. The wider Wairarapa region proudly claims to be the province of peace, the only region of the North Island where there was no bloodshed between Māori and Pākehā. Of course, the story is not quite as simple as that, but in the past, both Māori and Pākehā have celebrated this peacefulness. It's also a place where some of New Zealand's oldest Māori occupation sites can be found and where many Pākehā families have generations of settlement. But until 1989, it had no facility for the storage of archives. Local bodies' records were kept. I bet you can't guess where they were. They were under the stage of the town hall, and other important records were scattered through the community. The Masterton District Library had a large reference collection of local and New Zealand books, some BDM fiche, and a very small collection of donated archives, again stored in a basement. Many of Wairarapa records were either leaving the region to go to Alexander Turnbull Library or were being consigned to the fire or the dump. In April 1989, the Wairarapa branch of New Zealand Historic Places Trust called a public meeting to discuss forming an organisation to preserve the region's archives. And the Wairarapa, slightly unfortunate name, the Wairarapa Archival Society was formed. A local community trust provided free accommodation and an establishment grant, and the Masterton District Library funded a 0.5 position to be administered by the librarian. The first archivist was Heather Cormack, who worked part-time alongside her job at Turnbull Library. She was followed by historian Nikki Dalzell, then Charmaine Manina, who'd studied with Tina at the Wairarapa Polytechnic course. In 1997, Charmaine left to take an immersion course in Te Reo Māori and later returned to work with Wairarapa Iwi and Hapu in the claims process and donated a lot of those records to the archive. At that stage, the archive had one full-time employee with help from Archival Society members, and it also had some people working on a community-funded scheme indexing old newspapers. The archive had achieved moderate success and was becoming well-known in the local community. I was active in the Archive Society by that time. I was Deputy Chair and Publicity Officer. I was approached to see if I would be interested in taking over Charmaine's position. Now, I'm of a breed that won't be seen in the future. I have no degree in history and no postgraduate qualification in information management. In fact, my only tertiary qualification is a certificate in horticulture. My CV listed instead a time as a trainee journalist, a period in administration at a freezing works, and employment in horticulture, leading to owning my own nursery for more than 10 years. So probably not the usual background for an archivist. But those life experiences were actually vitally important in the way I was able to grow the archive. From my time at Waingawa Freezing Works, I learned about record keeping. So I was working literally in record keeping and the importance of accuracy. Ironically, this was actually to become very handy for me as the freezing works closed shortly after we opened the archive. And as a volunteer, I returned out there to pick up all the administration records and about 1,000 plans. Later still, I was to describe these records, so my familiarity with both the process and the subject ended up being quite invaluable. However, it was in the bedding plant production business I learned the most important lesson that I think helped drive the archive forward. And it was a simple one. In the nursery, we were not really in the business of growing bedding plants. Our goal was to sell bedding plants. If we could have found a way to get the millions of plants we needed without going to the expense of glass houses, thousands of cubic meters of pine bark, pumice and fertilizer, and lots of staff, the business would have been a lot more profitable. Of course, it made good sense to do the growing side as efficiently as possible, but it was important to always remember the point of the exercise was to sell plants. And the point of having an archive is to make the records available and to ensure that they are used. We're gatekeepers, but our job is to keep the gate open and usher people in. And for us, the secret lay in letting people know what we did and how we could help them. It's something that novelists talk a lot about, and that's about showing rather than telling. So we showed how that could be done. As it happened, when it came to getting publicity for the archive, we had a great advantage. Masterton is the capital of Wairarapa, and the region is large enough to sustain a daily newspaper. On the other hand, the region is not big enough to have sufficient news to fill a daily newspaper. So the local newspaper is always looking out for local stories. Even while I was a volunteer publicity officer for the archive, I realised the way to get traction within our community was to get the archive into the newspaper. That meant contacting the reporters whenever anything interesting came into the collection and writing pieces that related to contemporary events. This slide, incidentally, it's a way of tying things together, shows the newspaper's 2009 coverage of the then much vaunted community archive. So that's myself and Alison Fleming at the opening of the community archive. The Wairarapa archive had a bit to play in helping set that up. By the way, the advert on the right, that is also from 2009, although you might think it was from a Wanaka newspaper last week. Aucklanders go home. It's been an important part of what we do is to be we work hard on providing regular daily and weekly content, but so we still do all this. We've been contributing to the 100 Years Ago column for 25 years, and that's always attributed to the archive. Similarly, we've been selecting a weekly photograph from our collection for publication every Saturday. Also important, we contribute to the public dialogue around events. When Carterton celebrated its 150th anniversary, we provided a lot of copy as part of the commemoration. A feature on the eponymous ancestor of Carterton, a man called Charles Rooking Carter, who was incidentally the man behind the Wellington Observatory as well, marked the day as did a piece pertaining what it was like to live in Carterton in 1907. Probably not that much different to living in Carterton today, actually. As part of our work, we often stumble across stories that we think are very important for members of the public to have access to, that help us understand our past. This is not quite as mad as it might appear. There was a logical, if very tenuous thread of speculation as to whether a Melbourne serial murderer, who was suspected of being Jack the Ripper, although he probably wasn't, could have been living in Masterton shortly before he was apprehended in Melbourne. Needless to say, none of it's true. From the start, we've also been very active in presenting to the community. Each year, presentations are made to schools and various community groups. This can be onerous at times. The last year of the Dub 100 commemorations saw us deliver nearly 50 speeches, but it's an important part of what we do. Some groups now insist on an annual update. So I've been a regular visitor to Probus lunches and Rotary breakfasts. The relationship with our daily newspaper has proven crucial in getting the evidence about. The reporting staff regularly ring the archive for background for historical stories. The archive contributes background pieces for contentious issues. So the great new civic centre debate is the current one. And so we've been providing background stories on the various town halls and civic centres of the past. And of course, we contribute a regular stream of feature stories for the paper. So one of the things the archive does is provide an index for the local newspaper on a daily basis. So we daily index the local paper for local stories. And I checked that yesterday and found that as of yesterday, the staff had contributed exactly 500 feature stories for the paper since 2001. So you can see that's a fairly hefty contribution. The key benefit of this publicity work is to build up the concept that the archive is a trusted place to research for your history and to deposit your personal, corporate and community records. The harder we work on getting those records out into the community, the more they are offered to us. In fact, the relationship with the Times Age illustrates this. When the paper came back to local ownership, it was part of NZME, and downsized their premises, we took over their photographic collection, over 1 million images. They go back to 1959, and they're an incredible record of community activity. And you can imagine they're also they're a huge headache to try and describe. As part of the WW 100 commemorations, we combined with the newspaper to produce one story on a Wairarapa person connected with World War I for each issue for 100 issues. The newspaper then published an omnibus of the books in book form. The local Museum of Art and History joined in as well, staging an exhibition based on the stories and the book. So there was a way of delivering that information in 3 different ways. This was not the first time we'd produced a book, but was just another step in our publication program. It all started in 1998 with a bunch of bright school children researching how Marsden streets got their names, which culminated in our first publication thanks to the help of Ian and Diane Grant of Fraser Books. Ian will be known to many of you as the founder of the New Zealand Cartoon Archive, based in the National Library. This little slender volume of how Marsden streets were named, called Street Stories, less than 100 pages, has run through 3 editions and sold over 2,000 copies. This slide shows about half the books that we've published. There are over 30 titles now, some written by staff, others by people researching in the archive, and some commissioned. We've also tried to disseminate our records through other channels. As part of the drive to take records back out into the community, we devised a scheme to place plaques on all the streets in the central part of Marsden, based on our street story book. These signs have now been erected, and we are currently working on extending it to cover all Marsden streets. You won't be surprised to learn that when the council publicised the installation, it wasn't the archivist that was there, it was the mayor and the senior communications advisor. The street stories are part of a wider set of stories we've also written for the Library and Archive homepage. Short pieces written in such a way that they can be used as research for school students in particular. So this is a separate page for street stories. We also have a page with a whole lot of other stories ranked by subject. So there's people, places, natural events, etc. And they are very, very popular. Website statistics show that this is actually the most used service on the homepage of the Library and Archives homepage, apart from the catalogue. To help schools with projects, we've also produced some teacher resource material. For example, a range of different articles on aspects of the history of Marsden's Premier Park, Queen Elizabeth Park. I published a history of the book and of the park, and we mined that for information on particular sites within the park, then created web pages for those sites. They form part of a self-guided tour for classes. With the help of some teachers outside the classroom staff, we were able to create a learning resource for teachers, which guides them through the park and sets out learning opportunities they can avail themselves of. And as you can see, it's worked. Those resources are used and appreciated by local schools, and often feature in their digital newsletters to their parents. Sometimes the work is circular. For many years, we've been involved in a project with the main state secondary school in Marsden. Their senior history students researched the lives and deaths of the soldiers recorded on the Wairarapa War Memorial in Queen Elizabeth Park. Over the years, fortunately, that job has become a little easier with the advent of Papers Past, and of course the wonderful digitisation of World War I military records carried out so admirably by Archives New Zealand. As you can see, the local newspaper likes to report on the activity, so it's a good story for them. That, I think, was a front page story. Then the second nature is that those bring them to life records come back into the archives. So after the teacher has marked the work and it's been moderated, the work comes to the archive. So there's folders on those various soldiers, which are allowed for everyone to look at except future students. And then we reformat that again, and so it goes on to the Wairarapa Kete, so that there's information about John Harding Tatham, who was a local soldier who died during World War I. We've been really lucky. We've been involved with the SPIDER archive management system in various iterations, and that's proved very helpful. Just, I guess, one little point about it is that we catalogue, because the catalogue is connected to the library catalogue, we use common authority. So we use Library of Congress authorities. It means that researchers coming to the program can check both archives, newspaper and book records with one omni search. You can also search each of those things individually, but you can search over the whole lot. If, for example, you're looking for information on Sir Brian Lahore or something, which people do. We've also used that record to go to other portals as well. So obviously we were early contributors to the community archive, and in fact, as I say, involved in helping set it up. And one of the first small institutions to contribute to Matapihi, now of course morphed into Digital NZ. The harvesting of records from our system is on the part of Digital NZ is all done automatic. At the moment, of course, they only harvest records relating to digital assets, but in time, hopefully, that might change and we might have the equivalent of a national catalogue. Our growth over the last 30 years is testament to the fact that there is a desire on the part of our community for a place to preserve and arrange their records. An appreciation of the value of their history has been made accessible to them. If you look at those figures, you'll see some what I think are absolutely startling figures. We now have 4 full-time staff. So this is in a town of a population of just over 20,000, don't forget. The annual operations budget for the archive is $430,000. Again, this is from a population of 20,000. Have over 85,000 records on the database, but over 2 million photos and negatives, so that's a little bit of a worry. And we get around about 2,000 researchers, that's signed in researchers coming to physically visit the archive each year. So you can see it's very successful. The support is tangible. The Wairarapa Archive is funded entirely by ratepayers from the District Council and is clearly delineated in the Council's annual plan. It's quite separate from the library budget. This has been done from a lot of support from within our community, but also we've had lots of help from the archive sector. And there are a few names that I have to say. We were very, very reliant on help from the late Ian Matheson when we first established ourselves. And older members will remember Ian fondly. And also invaluable help from an ex-Wairarapa boy, the late Ken Scadden. And we were lucky that we had other Wairarapa-based archivists, people like Kay Sanderson and Pauline Porters, who've been able to give us help. And always staff from Archives New Zealand and National Library, just over the hill from us, have also been very supportive. With everyone's help, we've achieved a lot, but there's still a lot more to do. The recent changes in the school curriculum around teaching New Zealand history offers local and regional archives a great chance for further engagement with their communities. Although much of the narrative will be naturally based on the national story, each region will have its own unique kōrero. Archives New Zealand are already planning how they will be able to help at a regional level, not just a national one, but this is an obvious area for local archives with their stories of local kōrero to be involved. We've already spoken with local iwi about a cooperative approach, and are looking forward to further extending the way that we can serve our community. Kia ora. So, long story short, the archive was originally in an old, now demolished building, given to us rent-free by the Trustlands Trust. In 1997, at the same time that I started at the archive, we shifted to a building, basically a shop front in the main shopping area with a large storage area behind it. It was originally a stock and station agent's property. It then had been converted to a telecom office, which actually was a great bonus because it had been wired up for telecom. So we had all sorts of cabling right through the building. And we've gradually filled that up. But in March this year, we received news that that building is unsafe earthquake-wise. It's around about 25% earthquake to code. And the council immediately said you can't continue to work in there. So the records have remained in there. The staff have been moved out, and we're now working from some little portable rooms next to the library. But there's a complication in all this. So the town civic centre that I was talking about is to replace the town hall, and which itself is also an earthquake risk at about 9% of code. And the intention is to build the new library and archive together into that new centre. So a purpose-built archive on the way. I think what will happen is no one's happy with the records being in an earthquake-prone building. And so at the moment, bear in mind that I'm not employed, so I don't get to hear all the details of this. But at the moment, the staff are looking for a replacement building that will serve for maybe 10 years until, because the new building is in theory 7 years away, but we know it'll be longer than that. So there'll be a 10-year building. The key things for us are that it should be close to the library and that we should retain a shop frontage. The fact that people can walk in off the street, literally just like they would into a shop, has been an enormous benefit to the archive.